Hello and welcome to today's episode. My name's Philippa Winter. I'm the Chief Technologist here at CDW UK, and I'd like to introduce you to our panel today, and we're going to talk about the partnership in conjunction with CDW and with Everpure around study as a service. So I'm going to introduce the panel. So Dr. Malik and Eric. So Dr. Malik first, please.
Of course. So firstly, thank you, Philippa and Eric, and CDW and Everpure for the kind invitation. I'm Rizwan Malik. I'm a consultant radiologist.
Thank you, Dr. Malik. And Eric.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Eric Nystrom. I'm the global lead for Everpure for enterprise imaging.
So thank you. So I think we'll get into the detail. What I'd like to start with is, as a CIO when I was in the NHS, one of the biggest challenges was managing storage, and managing storage particularly with radiology, and that's where I used to get in a lot of conversations with Dr. Malik and his colleagues out of radiology in the PACS team. So Dr. Malik, it'd be lovely for you to talk, I suppose, around the history of how radiology storage and how that's changed, and I suppose the impact to you as a frontline clinician.
From one aspect, there's a part of me which says, as a clinician, I should never have had to worry about the impact of technology, and specifically on storage and how the way we work. But what we'll find, interestingly, is it has a fundamental impact on how we work, and more importantly, how what we do evolved over the years. So when I started out in my clinical practice, X-rays were the mainstay of diagnostic tests. Even very early on in my radiology career, CTs and MR scans were things that were only requested in very specific niche circumstances. Out of hours, it really had to be consultant to consultant on bended knee referrals. And that's now changed. We've gone from clinicians using their healing hands to make diagnoses to now using imaging as part of the workup and diagnostic tool. And that helps in both ways. It keeps me in a job, clearly, because the imaging grows. But actually, from the point of view of a patient, you can understand if you're going to anesthetize a patient, if you're going to cut them open, you want to have as much information as possible before you make formative changes. So that would explain volume growth and also complexity. As technology evolved, we went from X-rays and ultrasound to predominantly CT becoming the workhorse of imaging studies, and MR, instead of becoming niche, it's now a routine part of it. And PET scans then become the exotica. There's always something which was the thing you used niche. And again, as time goes on, that'll become more and more. There was a time very early in my career at Bolton, I was the only chest radiologist at the time. And it was a source of pride for me to leave the hospital on a Friday evening, having reported everything, knowing that there was no unreported chest work. It didn't take too long for us to get to a stage where that was simply not feasible. The volume of work just meant I either didn't see my family, or I accepted that there was more work than we could manage, and even multiple people could manage. So that deals with growth in numbers and the rationale for that. The next part of that, of course, is scanners got more and more sophisticated. And so if we take one type of examination, a high resolution CT of the thorax, for example, that used to be a study which was taking a 1 millimeter slice taken at 1 centimeter interval. So the slices were that far apart. And so a whole study would consist of about 32 slices. As scanners evolved, that same study, high resolution CT of the thorax, now is high resolution, and you're looking at well over 500 images per sequence and multiple sequences. So that 32 or 64 slice study is now thousands of images. So for any one examination, I'm now having to go through a huge amount of data. And commensurately, even if the amount of imaging didn't change, we find that there is an exponential increase in the volume of the same number of studies are taking as well. That then led into some of the discussions we had. Was suddenly the rate limiting step wasn't the scanner. The rate limiting step was how much we could put in our storage, and our workflows, how to manage not what the scanner could produce, not how fast I could report it, but just what kind of things we could reconstruct and present to me to be able to allow those images.
And obviously that has a massive impact on, treatment, but you could argue that if you didn't have that innovation and obviously the changes and modernisation in the way scans were, you're getting better reporting, so you can report, like you said before, around, say, a cancer patient.
Yep.
And about now around the modules that, the models of that you can identify because of the number and the slices that you've now got exposed to you.
Absolutely this. If we go back to that humble examination, bear in mind for lung cancer, if we were taking images which are 1 centimetre apart, for me to be able to see a cancer, potentially it had to be at least 1 centimetre and hit one of those slices, or we could miss them when they fell between it. Now I spend most of my life counting nodules. Now when the examinations are 1 millimetre thick, we aren't waiting for a cancer to have grown that size. We are picking them up at 2, 3, 4 millimetres. Clearly better for the patient. Clearly it means we also have to change the way we manage patients, because we're now not managing and impacting treatment at a late stage. We're trying to define treatment mechanisms at a much early stage of the journey for better outcomes as well.
So thank you, Dr. Malik. I think in sort of wrapping that piece up from your point of view is obviously, the changes with innovation, the more access to those images, which is actually being able to treat our patients faster, quicker, but obviously then the exponential pressure that puts on the storage. And I know from being a CIO, managing those costs, can be quite significant. And we used to have the conversations regularly that, you're coming up to losing storage, and what do we do about that? And is it in your capital plan? Is it in my capital plan? So how do we start to talk about that? So I think coming to you, Eric, what I'd like to understand from you is where you've seen that change, and around obviously some of the with the Everpure, what does that mean?
Right, so if we look at the changes you're talking about in the scans, for example, that's very interesting because the modality vendors, they apply software upgrades. Here's new enhancements, but what comes with these enhancements is increased slices, more images per scan, and it's not something that you as a CIO are really forewarned for, because it's just regular maintenance of these modalities. So when it comes to Everpure and the solution around imaging as a service that we built, we anticipate these things. We anticipate image growth. We look at average study sizes, and we know from imaging that imaging doesn't double over 5 years, or it doesn't double over 10 years. But for that reason, we can say here under Everpure, you pay one price per exam, and it allows that study to double over the contract period. That way, you as a clinician or you as a CIO or a CFO know that the cost will stay the same and the growth is accounted for during the contract period.
Which was music to my ears, and I suppose taking me back about how I had to manage my budget, how I used to have to manage, the IT infrastructure. For me, I think it's really great music to my ears. If for me to take that message to my director of finance, I think she would be quite delighted about how I can identify and fix those costs over a more significant period. Because let's face it, every trust has to look at, best endeavours and how do they manage that, but how do we also manage that storage cost, which if we get that wrong and we don't have the right strategic intention for that, we can actually then limit, for you as a clinician, the access to that data that helps you treat them and prevents harm.
So yeah, I think in that regard, take the analogy of a swan or a duck serenely gliding over a pond. That's potentially what we want. We want to have stability in how we work, but allow evolution of the modalities. When new best practice comes along, we want to be able to introduce that within our workflow seamlessly without always having to pause, reflect on, are we allowed to introduce a new way of working? Are we allowed to introduce change? Or even, do we have to change the way we work at specific intervals because we have to lift and shift? So not only are the volume of what we do increasing, but the storage sizes are also going, and that has demonstrable impact on the way we manage patient care.
I'm sure this is something also that was seen over time when 3D and these kind of features were introduced to imaging, right? Because before we were taking single slices, and now we're taking multiple slices, and it's growing into larger environments. And when you go out and purchase a PACS, for example, it's purchased on a volume-based licensing. And you know the growth because you look at your current growth, it's going to be somewhere between 3 to 7% per year. So we're allowing you to take those metrics and just align it with Everpure on a storage perspective and say, this is our exam growth, these are our yearly exams, and this is our average study size. And then it's predictable. Then all you need to know is how many exams am I growing by, or how many more exams are we ingesting into the system over time.
So if we think of that in relation to, and some of the impact again to clinicians on that migration piece or that changing and managing that capital plan, and where you might have that refresh cycle every 5 years, you know, that one has an impact to the business, but very much also if you keep having to do that, there's a cost, one around the egress ingress and about the data sovereignty, but also is the downtime that then can impact on the clinician. So let's talk about that piece as well, if that's okay.
I think I'm going to go back one step before we do that, which is what we really shouldn't have to do is map timeframes of when we can manage advancements in the care we provide, advancements in the imaging studies, or which new best practice imaging modalities, practices that are either deployed elsewhere in the world or even elsewhere within the same conurbation. We don't want to have the haves and have-nots. Any one patient should have the right to expect the same standard of care and the same standard of imaging, irrespective of which hospital to go to, not based on the budget they've ascribed to the storage. And so we've had this conversation in the past where it was decided rightly that we should always assess for example, the spine on all the scans we did on the abdomen and chests. To do that, we had reformats which were done on the workstation and sent to us rather than us having to always remember to do this new type of work on the fly, which then meant we had, for the same examination, a new set of images which were incorporated onto that study size. And we very quickly saturated what we had. Ergo, yes, it's important for you to do this as part of your routine work. The Royal College mandates it, but I'm not used to doing it yet. And during that period of time, there will be slippage, there will be mistakes. And to facilitate not inherently unsafe, but non-best practice care, we had to decide what we were going to do, how we were going to capture what we should do in a way that satisfied the storage requirements we did. That then gets on to, I want to introduce something new within our department, new techniques, or advancements in the techniques we're doing already, but we can't until we've upgraded our storage hierarchy. And then during that interval time, who's the sucker who's on call? Because inevitably we do these changes out of hours. Ironically, at the time when imaging is meant to be only concentrating on emergency care, is the time we're devoting to make our image acquisition or provision to the radiologist less safe, because in the background, we're doing the changes of our data ingress and egress. And you want to be able to go back to my analogy of the swan. You want to ensure that all the changes you do at the back end don't impact the serenity of the imaging we get, so the care we provide isn't compromised by what's going on.
And absolutely, as a clinician, you shouldn't have to be worried about that. You just want to have the service wherever you work, whether that's from home or whether that's from in the hospital, isn't it? It's got to be that seamless piece. So Eric, how does Everpure support that?
Well, I mean, with Everpure, for example, you can run all your AI workloads. Today, you're probably compartmentalizing your data because the storage is built as good enough for the PACS environment or the VNA environment. The vendors, they provide you with a software solution, and that's kind of where that's their bread and the butter, and the storage and the infrastructure needs to fit that. But what we do is we deliver a solution that not only meets the expectations of that, but it also meets the expectations of the potential AI workloads that you were doing in the future. We go to shows like RSNA and we learn that the radiologists are taught that here you can bring in your own AI algorithms and you can run these across the imaging. Well, the number one question is my infrastructure good enough to do that? With Everpure, the infrastructure is good enough to do that. So it will sustain that environment and you can run these additional workloads that you want to do to enhance your patient care for your patients without impacting the environment. And to take that one step further, you can also now unleash your researchers, because we know that most teaching hospitals and most universities, they have a very strong research arm. And all these PACS systems have the ability to anonymize data and set up the data so you can run this research. Well, now we're not moving this data. Now we're not moving data with PHI and putting them in buckets and creating potential risks. You can unleash these tools and run these tools all on this Everpure array that can also sustain your clinical workloads.
So let me take you back, Dr. Malik, to COVID, and you were a trailblazer in that time around the utilisation of AI and about, I suppose, what you were trying to achieve clinically and the benefits you were getting that, but then obviously some of the issues that were caused by that, and then actually how, I suppose, study as a service could be a great opportunity in that scenario.
Yeah. I think if we'd have gone back to first principles, it would have been very difficult to argue the case that storage and storage speed is a clinical problem, but it absolutely is. AI is a really good example. The world's on fire. We looked into a way of mitigating the care we provide by the use of artificial intelligence. And I'm very proud to say that in Bolton, we had one of the first artificial intelligence deployments clinically within the NHS. And actually, it was a very specific use case, which we scaled through the region and through the country. But to even get that far, it was only feasible because the CTO said, you do what you need to do. It's my responsibility to spin up a virtual server to provide you with the storage infrastructure and the speed infrastructure to facilitate this. And we did. And it's actually only 2 years later where he got his collar felt of, could
Probably
we justify, well, indeed, justify this energy spike, which we keep saying, and why is there a server over here when over here we're talking about you don't have enough space? Again, it's yet another example of innovation had to be constrained, or in this case, it wasn't because someone took that responsibility on my behalf and away from me, but in normal circumstances, you're not only constrained by the cost of the artificial intelligence solution, but also who's going to manage the infrastructure to support it? Who's going to manage the speed to support it? When the imaging data goes to the AI server, what do you get back? And we did eventually have to have some compromise that you're not going to get the full fat AI data. You're only going to get secondary captures because that's what we're going to use. Now AI is far more advanced, and actually it directly engages with the raw CT imaging data to be able to give us holistic interpretations on the fly. That means that we have to scale for any one examination, not only the storage, but the speed of what you do. It's not good enough for someone to be scanned, for that image then to go to multiple different servers, multiple different storage areas, and then come to me. I no longer sit in an office on site in Bolton for a lot of the time. There is a home office in Cheadle, which is a satellite of the Royal Bolton Hospital. And some of the problems that teleradiology companies, for example, faced, where we also had to deal with the speed of retrieving priors, how you can manage the cybersecurity of these things, are now real and present problems that our core team on the day job have to deal with and have to manage in a way going forward. And again, that's looking at radiology in a very traditional sense. We haven't even got onto the point of digital pathology, image co-registration, how you can facilitate the research and data masking and segmentation. Strangely, the rate limiting step for advancing clinical care isn't the technology, it's how you host it, the speed of hosting and the size of hosting it.
So Eric, tell me about pathology.
So imaging as a service started out for radiology. We can also offer it when it comes to digital pathology. The difference there is we look at average slide size instead of average exam size, because slides is what's kind of the biggest variation when it comes to digital pathology. But for this reason, we are now also offering this for digital pathology. And we think that this, as we see digital pathology growing and being adapted more and more into the clinical workflows side by side with the PACS and the radiology reads, we have therefore added this into the workflow also.
I think that's really important, because actually what we're pivoting from is the concept of digital imaging to digital diagnostics. And not only is radiology and pathology going to converge, and if you think storage sizes in radiology expensive, you have a whole other thing coming when you factor in this size of data sets in digital pathology. And then we haven't even got into the concept of genomics. The future, and for those of you who are Trekkies, is Bones was a radiologist. We are going to deal with multimodal diagnostic inputs, which means that the data sets we deal with are going to be huge. The compute we deal with has to be able to correspond to that.
How exciting.
I need my Starship.
I mean, the fact that we're going to targeted medicine versus medicine where we think it might be this or that, with genomics, pathology, and radiology all married in together, the quality of care will reach a whole nother level.
Absolutely.
So taking that back, and I think one of the biggest things is what I want to get across today is how a CIO, those PACS teams and radiologists think of that future management and future strategy, because obviously AI is just going to get more used, more exponential to support the radiologist in really identifying what you need to be able to do that diagnosis, isn't it, and treat that person in the correct way. So Eric, I suppose, how is Everpure, I suppose, supporting that, but also providing a modernized way to support that change and that exponential need that the clinicians will have to make sure it's performant, that there's no issues, that that ingress and that egress is just, you know, simultaneous, etc.
I mean, first of all, clinicians should never have to honestly be concerned about what storage do I have or how much storage do I need, or is it performant enough for me to provide quality patient care, right? So if we start there, what we're delivering essentially is Everpure, you know, we pioneered in creating self-driving cars and launching rockets. And when I came to Everpure to build out the platform fit for imaging, everyone asked me, they said, you know, do we need this much performance? Well, performance wasn't the top of the reason that we went in with Everpure for imaging. The top of the reason was everything else. There's no hardware refreshes that create disruptions to the environment. During the contract period, we constantly upgrade the system, so you're running the latest, the greatest. So the day of install is actually the oldest your system will be. Year by year, we continuously upgrade the system. It gets denser, it gets quicker, it gets better. So if we look at it from that perspective, you know, I think that what we've created at Everpure is we've taken away the headaches that a radiologist and the clinical team has struggled with for years, which is, how much storage do I need for these new modalities? How much more storage do I need for these new workflows? Let it be 3D, let it be AI, let it be multidisciplinary boards. All of that, we're just delivering a infrastructure solution that will not only run your PACS good enough, but it will run it all the way into the future and the future clinical workloads that you need to do.
So that's, I think, something which is very important to pick up on. That right now we have a bit of a fudge, I think, that we've used this nebulous term of sending stuff to the cloud to mitigate some of these risks. But when you talk about AI, for example, or more broadly, when you consider within the NHS the concept of GDPR, data sovereignty, and going forward, the reputational impact, but actually the medical legal impact you have of where that data sits, where it can be retrieved from, where it can be actioned on, you then, again, don't want to have to compromise what solutions are you allowed to use based on where their server sits, where the storage sits, where you're allowed to send data going forward. I would simply just want to be in a position where I can effect safe, effective, advancing, innovative clinical care, and the magic tech fairies deal with all the rest of it. And we never have to have the conversation of, actually, you can't do that because that company uses servers which sits outside of the remits of what's allowable. You can't do that because actually it's all very well sending it to this cloud, but then you're limiting yourself. And you never want to be in a position where you have to compromise what technology you can use based on the storage environments that you have to live in. Standards should be standards, should be standards.
Right, so what we did then, we took our knowledge from imaging at Everpure and we said, to remove this from the clinicians and from the users in the environment, what if we align ourselves with how you buy packs? We said, you buy packs based on volume licensing. That volume licensing guarantees that you can do all the advanced visualization tools you need to do. You can use all of the features of the packs. So we said, okay, we'll look at the volume licensing. And as long as the volume licensing matches up with the storage, then you should be able to do your work and then continue and grow as you go. So that's what we've done at Everpure. We said, let's match up the PACS volume licensing with the storage. When you design a PACS, you look at average study size, so you can build in the growth of your PACS and how big the software needs to be, how many servers you need. Those are the metrics that we've used at Everpure for creating the storage for PACS storage. And the key about it is that you shouldn't have to pay for storing that exam month over month or year over year. You should pay for it once. Just like, in some cases there's reimbursement cycles that pay for that exam once, or there's government funding that is intended to pay for those exam once to store and maintain that. Now, if we look historically within the enterprise imaging world, there's been hardware refreshes every 5 years. If you have a PEDS case, that PEDS case is going to be stored on your PACS for at least 18 years until that child becomes an adult. Well, if we think about that, hardware refresh every 5 years, that's at least 3 hardware refreshes over the lifetime of that PEDS. That means that you paid for that exam to be migrated, maintained, and stored 3 times over. So at Everpure, what we say is during the contract period, and we align ourselves, we can do 10 years to match up with your tenders here, then you pay once to store that exam over the contract period of 10 years.
So that's great, and I think it's really important to identify what study as a service really offers you as a commercial model, because it doesn't work. Like you say, you are paying multiple times for the same image, and really, if you think about the great public pound and how we use that, that's not the right way to do it, is it, for our taxpayers from that point of view? I have lots of conversations with trusts, and they're concerned about that, disaster recovery and that access to that information when it's needed. Because fundamentally, these are core investigations, not only in A&E, but in theatres and obviously managing patients in clinical diagnostics. If you haven't got access to that, it's catastrophic for those patients, particularly in an acute setting or, long-term, all around that. So talk to me a little bit about Everpure, about, I suppose, foundationally around that compliance and that governance, but also that cyber immutability piece.
Sure. So historically, within the enterprise imaging environments, these environments are not backed up because it takes too long to essentially restore from backups and to back them up, because we're dealing with images that go anywhere from 125K to maybe a couple of megabytes per image, but there's thousands of images. So at Everpure, across the board, and this is not specific for imaging, but we offer something called Safe Mode. Safe Mode is an immutable snapshot of the entire array, and in case you get compromised, this snapshot can be unlocked. But the way that it gets unlocked is essentially kind of like the nuclear keys. You need to call into our help desk, and once you have the codes, then you can unlock it and we'll restore the replica. What's unique about it, though, is we can restore a petabyte of DICOM, for example, just about instantaneously. So there's no delay of restoring the data. There's no delay of pulling back that archive in case it has been compromised. And we need to talk about the other side of it also is, well, how much do these snapshots take up? How much space does it take up? So if we have a DICOM archive that's about 1.5 petabytes, it only takes up about 2 terabytes in snapshots across the week to protect this DICOM data. And these are all features that we don't charge for. So if you purchase Everpure, Safe Mode is included with all of our installs. Early on when I started with Everpure, we had to turn it on manually, but now it's actually turned on by default for all of our customers. So if you are an Everpure customer, you are protected by immutable snapshots across the board.
That's fabulous. And I think one of the things that used to keep me awake at night is that very much on the CT that I work with and the board and on your risk register of all the trusts that there are in the UK. You know, that's your worst nightmare, isn't it? And that access to that data so seamlessly is key. So yeah.
And then what you described, you know, compare that to not even in case of cybersecurity, but just during those lift and shift fault moves to have to contend with days, weeks, or God forbid months where you're having to retrieve your own data from an archive store, and knowing that during that period of time the care you're providing is compromised based on just what you have available to you, to be able to do away with having to make compromising clinical care is, I think, a really important consideration as well.
Yeah, no, it's very important. I mean, we should never compromise on clinical care. I haven't seen the numbers recently, but when a hospital is ransomwared or one of these archives are taken down, it's millions of dollars or millions of pounds that affects the environment and these clinical environments.
And it's not just the pounds, is it? It's the actual harm to the patients. You know, we've seen that in recent attacks recently in the UK, you know, that actually, sadly, it does cause death. It does cause impact to people being treated on time. So yeah, it's really significant, and none of us want that. We don't go into this business to cause any harm, do we? So it's about how do we mitigate that?
Yeah, and I think if you extend that concept even further, the reality is when you're operating within a public sector environment, which frankly is financially constrained, a lot of what we do is what's the best we can get with the financial envelope we've got. So there's always a not good, but what's the best we get for that environment. It's always what's good enough. What can we get away with during this financial envelope? And in an enterprise imaging environment, storage was owned as after you've paid for all the heavy stuff, what can we afford? What's the most we can get based on what we've got, despite all the computations? And actually, what we want to be in a position of just scaling is we plan a model of evolution that we can onboard, steady state, allow for some innovation, allow for some uncertainty of stuff which we don't envision currently in the way clinical practice would change, and directors of finance not have to worry about, well, we can't afford that today. If you can find a model which scales based on usage, you can mitigate some of that concern, knowing that you can grow, because none of the innovation is going to be deployed immediately. You're always going to phase it in. And if you can marry the clinical innovation with the storage, with the financial models, if you can then wrap that up with security aspects, which again has reputational risks as well as clinical and medical legal risks, and mitigate all of those in a safe, predictable environment, that is the sort of utopia you're aiming for.
So with that said, what we want to do is with Everpure, we want to deliver a solution that essentially covers all your clinical needs. And so not only do we deliver study as a service on a price per study that you pay once, we have the immutable snapshots that protect you for ransomware, and it comes for free with the environment. But what we also do is we wrap the whole thing in a performance SLA. We look at what PACS or VNA are you running today, and with the performance SLA, it will guarantee to deliver the performance that you need for that clinical environment during the extended period of the license that you have with Pure. Let it be 5 years or 10 years for that storage environment.
Okay, so thank you. I think before we wrap up, it's been lovely having you here, Dr. Malik, and you, Eric. Thank you for flying in for this today. But I suppose one question back to you would be, what does good look like for you with regards to you as a clinician in this world with regards to what you need from storage, etc.?
I think from what we've discussed over the course of the sort of past half an hour or so, it would have been difficult for me to have pressed the case that storage is a clinical problem. And yet I think we found, for various reasons, it is. Good for me is I shouldn't ever have to think about that in terms of how we deliver safe, effective care. And not only that, as someone who is a clinician interested in technology, I shouldn't ever have to compromise the art of the possible based on the limitations of the infrastructure we deploy on purely the storage access that we have.
Which then prevents the postcode lottery for that patient, doesn't it? Which
Absolutely
is so
does.
important. And Eric, I suppose you coming back to seeing what good looks like from the front line, I suppose as a final, how does Everpure provide that?
Well, being in imaging for, as long as I have been, and when I came to Everpure, that's kind of what my goal was to make it so clinicians don't have to worry about technology or infrastructure, so you can focus on what you're good at. Do what you're really good at, which is provide the diagnosis and provide great patient care. And so with that said, we just kind of aligned ourselves with how you purchase radiology software. And we wrapped that all, like I said, in a performance guarantee. We align ourselves with study as a service. So it's easy for your clinical team and your executive team to align study cost with storage cost and wrap that all in one solution that delivers great clinical care across the board.
That's fabulous. So thank you, Dr. Malik, and thank you, Eric, for today. It's been really informative. So thank you, everybody. If you want to have more information, please get in touch with your account team and look forward to the next episode. Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen.